Those millennials don't get it like we do,
No.
They're out there in their skinny jeans. We're out here with our baggy pants
Exactly.
and dad shoes.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to what is now a special edition of the Press Start podcast, Press Start Australia's weekly video game discussion podcast. I'm your host, Ewan, and I'm joined today by my fellow Zoomer and co-host, Harry.
It's the Zoomer cast now.
We've taken over. This is we're gonna call this one Zoomers Unleashed. It's the two youngest people in the Press Start team that are carrying it today. I don't think we've ever had this opportunity before, just to have like a one-on-one chat, you and I.
No,
But,
yeah.
Yeah, I'm here for it. And I just can't wait to hear like James like absolutely hating on it.
Yeah,
Like,
I can imagine when
Brody
he
as
listens,
well,
he's
all
going to be
those-
rolling his eyes.
Yeah. Just those old curmudgeons, you know. They just don't. Those millennials don't get it like we do, you know.
No.
They're out there in their skinny jeans. We're out here with our baggy pants
Exactly.
and dad shoes.
Thank you.
On a serious matter, we're going to be discussing your review of Monster Hunter Wilds and Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii today. You've got come with all the reviews to discuss today, which is awesome. And we've also got the cancellations and studio closures at Warner Brothers Games and Fable getting delayed to discuss as well. So heaps to get into, but I do want to start straight away with Monster Hunter Wilds because I've done nothing but read glowing review after glowing review over the last couple of days, yourself included. Firstly, what's your history with the Monster Hunter franchise or with the series? Have you played many before?
Yeah, I played Monster Hunter for a long time. I initially got into... the first one I played was Try, which originally released on the Wii, which is like the second last... Monster Hunter is split into generations like Pokemon, and Try was like the second last entry of the third generation, and I hated it. Like, I just couldn't get into it. And then they did 3 Ultimate, which released on the 3DS and Wii U. I hated that as well. And then for some reason, I tried 3U again, and it all just clicked. And I think I've been playing ever since. I played like 4 Ultimate after that and Generations, and I've been playing ever since I played 3U and have gone back to the older games and things like that. So it's a long time now.
Nice. And were you a fan, kind of, I guess, like when it made the switch to a more kind of Western style sort of RPG with Worlds? Did that click with you in equal measure?
In a different way, yeah. They do definitely feel like different Monster Hunter games. I know that a lot of the people who have been playing for a long time, going back to 3 and things like that, sort of say that some of the charm is gone. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily gone, but it definitely feels different. It's more mainstream now. And I think Rise was a good way for them to sort of jaunt back to the old style of Monster Hunter. But I do like the new stuff as well. And I think that in some ways, like, it kind of has to break new grounds to maintain interest. Otherwise, they're just doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah, I'm curious I'm going to pick some questions for you as well, kind of like on that theme, because I haven't played a Monster Hunter game before, but I've got this one installing on my PlayStation as we speak, I think. And yeah, I'm excited, I guess, to kind of jump in. I think Worlds kind of caught my eye, and I had some friends that kind of played it and made use of the cooperative element to the game too.
Yeah.
And they have kind of persuaded me to give this one a go, and I've got no doubt that you're going to also kind of persuade me as well through the context of this conversation. But how would you sum up your experience of the game? If you were to kind of like summarize your review for me, what would you say about Monster Hunter Wilds, this latest iteration?
Yeah, I think it's like far and away the easiest one to get into for a newcomer. If you've never played the series before, this is undoubtedly like the entry to start with. I think World was really good for that as well, but there's some elements of Wilds that are more sanded back and just a little bit more approachable for new players, I think. And I really enjoyed sort of the new direction that they took, where World is like sort of taking that core formula into the mainstream. Wilds feels like they did something really new with it, and leaned into some of the newer elements of World that they maybe didn't spend as much time on, but they obviously sort of really liked toying with in development, and they took it further in this one. So it feels really different, but also same. And I am mixed on that in some ways. Like I do miss the old style Monster Hunter games, but they'll always be there. So I'm excited to see like where they take it further. And I really enjoyed it overall. I mean, if you've looked at my review, it's a 10 out of 10. So
yeah,
yeah.
I was gathering you enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah.
What's the pace of the game like as well? Like I kind of got the sense digesting some of the reviews over the last couple of days, reading your own as well. Like, did you find it a quicker paced game to what you're accustomed to as well?
I think the main story definitely was faster in terms of pacing. Monster Hunter is a little bit strange in the sense that, like, traditionally it's split into low rank and high rank, and then they'll have master rank, or like G rank as it's referred to in Japan. And typically, and they did this in World as well, the main story sort of stretches across low rank and high rank. They did that in World and Rise, and some of the older games as well, but most of the older games, like, high rank was reserved for multiplayer. Anyway, in this game, like, the main story is almost entirely constrained to low rank, which are like the first few hunts basically, and that probably goes for about 15 hours or so. Whereas World's main story, World took probably about, I would say, 20 to 25 for an experienced player, so it's a bit shorter in that sense. But World's main story did also go through high rank, so it's a bit different in that sense. Like, high rank is the post game in this game, and there's also a much stronger focus on narrative overall this time. And I think that landed for them in this one, and I think keeping it constrained to low rank is good as like a tutorial to get people into the game, because the majority of the time most people will spend with Monster Hunter is in the post game.
Okay, there's a few things in there that I want to pick apart, like dig into a little bit more. On the story side of things, obviously that's a major sort of draw card for me in a lot of the games I play. I've seen some that have played the game saying it kind of took a little bit more of a backseat for them. They weren't paying too much attention to the cutscenes, whereas others have kind of called it out as being something that maybe separates this game apart from the Monster Hunter games before it. Like, how did the story impact your overall enjoyment of the game, would you say?
Yeah, I liked it a lot, which usually isn't a case for me for Monster Hunter. Like, I usually, at a surface level, like, I'm along for the ride. Because almost all Monster Hunter games and the expansions as well have been about, there's some sort of monster terrorizing the village or the ecosystem, go deal with it. And then there's inevitably...
you're a Monster Hunter, that's what you do, get out there.
Inevitably some other threat behind that thing that has been pulling the strings the whole time. And it always has followed that framework. And in some ways this one does, but it's a little bit more interested in its characters. And I think what it does with, like, the flagship monster, which is the one they put on the case and is in all the marketing, which for this game is called Arkveld. I think what they do with Arkveld is really interesting. And, like, but I also think that a lot of the enjoyment I got out of it came from my history with the series. There are some really cool lore bits at the end of the game that are, like, kind of deep cut, and you do need to be like a fan to fully appreciate. And I think it's, like, so deep cut that some people might not like it if they really like the lore. But I personally thought it was cool what they did with it. So yeah, I think, like, just generally there's more of an effort to keep things more focused on a smaller cast of characters that are more fleshed out. They have, like, actual character arcs. Your actual hunter is more characterized, more, like, he's more fleshed out. There's, like, proper voice acting for it. They have an active role in the story. They converse with other characters, and I really liked that aspect of it as well. And your Palico now, which is, like, the little cat thing that hunts with you, like, that has voice acting as well now. So there's a whole bunch of, like, little things like that have really showed that Capcom focused a lot on the narrative for this game. And I think it does pay off if you're, like, a fan of Monster Hunter. And even if you're not, I think you can still enjoy the characters and the journey that they go on and the sort of plot reveals that come through towards the end game as well.
Yeah. And it sounds like that story is kind of packaged into sort of like a more digestible format, I guess, kind of like touching on the difficulty of the game too. That's been something else I've seen others kind of call out. It's kind of notably easier than previous games. Is that more just within the context of the story, and the end game is still just as hard as you'd want it to be, or much of a challenge as you'd want it to be? Or is it just overall kind of an easier game?
Yeah, I think overall it is an easier game for sure.
Okay.
But I also think that it's a bit of a weird conversation to have, because Monster Hunter, like, low rank especially, and even high rank, has traditionally always been quite easy. Like, I don't think it's ever really been hard. There were some post-game hunts towards the end of World in the base game that were pretty difficult. But difficulty in Monster Hunter has always come from, like, G rank or Master rank, which since World has been in the form of expansion, so they did Iceborne for World and they did Sunbreak for Rise, they'll inevitably do a Master Rank expansion for this game as well, and that's probably where the real difficulty will come in with new title updates and stuff. I also think that this game has a smaller roster, like in total monsters versus something like Worlds, and I think because of that smaller quest density, there is less room for a difficulty curve that gets to the highs that World does. There are definitely some endgame hunts in Wilds that are difficult, and I think some of the reviews that are saying that it's not hard at all maybe haven't touched those hunts because they are like difficult. They're not messing around. But like for me, and I think a lot of other people who have played Monster Hunter for a long time, like the base game has never really been about the difficulty. It's more about, build crafting and finding fun ways to hunt monsters and experimenting with different weapons. And then when the G rank Master Rank expansion comes out, that's when things start getting real.
Nice. What advice do you have for someone that maybe kind of considering diving in and giving this a go if it's their first foray into a Monster Hunter game?
I think stick with a simple weapon is probably the best thing to advise, at least to start with. I think because this game has I think there's 15 or 16 different weapon types, and a lot of people say that each one is almost its own combat system, and in a way some of them are. They can be really quite complex, and I think it's very easy as a new player to gravitate to the ones that sound and look cool, like Charge Blade or like Hunting Horn and Gun Lance and stuff. And they are really cool, but if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to feel like you aren't doing anything. So I would advise, if you're just starting out with Monster Hunter, maybe look at Dual Blades or Hammer. Greatsword is a really good beginning weapon. And then you can branch out into the more complex stuff like Charge Blade and Gun Lance, the ranged weapons and stuff, which tend to get a little bit more complex. And I think the beauty in Monster Hunter is that the progression is twofold in that you are getting better armor and weapons, but you're also becoming more familiar with the actual weapon itself and how it functions and how to use it against monsters and things like that. So there is a bit of meta progression in that sense, and discovering a new weapon and clicking with it for the first time is an incredible feeling in Monster Hunter. It's so good because you feel like you've unlocked this whole new sandbox of possibilities.
How does that sort of moment to moment combat kind of build on Worlds before it? Have they made kind of any major changes to the flow of the combat?
One really big one, it's called the focus system. I also think this is another reason that it's a really good place to start for beginners. So if you've played previous Monster Hunter games, they can be I guess rigid is the way to describe the combat. It's actions are very intentionally heavy. They're very choreographed. If you press a button, you're pretty well locked into that move. And if you made the wrong decision, you're going to get punished for it. In this game, focus mode, it lets you aim at monster parts, but it also lets you reposition attacks. So if you're in the middle of a big swing, and the monster's about to move, you can actually aim and adjust your hunter to be able to hit the swing. Or also to potentially dodge an attack if you angle it right and things like that. The other thing that the focus system has is if you're constantly damaging a specific part of a monster, it will create a wound, which is signified by these red, they're called scout flies. They hover around the wound. It's basically a highlighted red mark. You deal increased damage to those wounds. Once they take certain damage, they'll disappear because you can't exploit them forever. But you can also use focus attacks, which are these big one-off attacks that pop the wound instantly, but they're quite flashy and they stagger the monster. So in that sense, the wounds add quite a bit to how you strategize taking down a monster. And they do play into weapon kits, which I think is the cool part. Charge Blade, for example, which is a weapon that I quite often use in the previous games, has a mode called Savage Axe mode. So the Charge Blade is like a sword and a shield, and you can morph it together into a big axe. And in Iceborne, they introduced this new, attack where you can turn the axe into a chainsaw almost, and you can hold the attack button and it tears through monsters. You can only access that mode in this game by exploiting a wound. So you can't just go into it like you could in Iceborne or Rise, for example. So I think that's really cool. And then there are two other, these are kind of small things, but they add so much to the combat for me personally. They're called offset attacks and clashes. So clashes are just if you block at the right time and it's the right kind of attack, the camera will like pull in. It's been in the trailers where like the hunter is like pushing their weapon against the monster, and they're like you're mashing a button to push them back, and it leaves them open for an attack if you win the clash.
Yeah.
They're really cinematic, and they're contextual as well, so you feel like a badass when you pull it off, like because you did it.
It
like
kind of sounds like those Final Fantasy 16 like cinematic clashes,
Exactly.
or whatever they call those, but like less scripted.
Yeah, and you have to cause them. I think that's the best part about it, is that you feel so good when you do it. And the other ones, the offset attacks, and these are so cool. Like, I can't get past how satisfying they feel. Only certain weapons have them, but they're basically like uppercuts that will counter a monster's attack. And if you do it properly, they will be sent reeling, and you will like run in, and you can just lay the smackdown on them while they're trying to get their bearings. So it's really cool because some of the attacks are like the other day I was using Switch Axe, which has an offset attack as like an uppercut. And this monster like tried to dive bomb me, and I like smacked it out of the air with the offset attack, and it just landed on the ground. And it's so cool.
I gather just by like, because your passion is really showing through as you're talking about this combat. I gather like this was kind of one of the more enjoyable like elements of the game. This kind of moment to moment combat, which as I guess you would expect on the face value of things. But like, were the monsters themselves like designed in such a way you felt like this was kind of them taking it a step further with the series?
In a few ways, yeah. I do think that like even though this is as I previously mentioned, like one of the smaller launch rosters, it is perhaps the most diverse. I think it has every.
I wondered if it was a matter of like quality over quantity.
Yeah, I think this definitely is a quality over quantity thing. Like this game has, I'm pretty sure, every monster archetype in the game in Monster Hunter. Because monsters are split into different classes. So you have like flying wyverns, which are like dragons, or like brute wyverns, which are like T-Rex type things. Temnocerans, which are like insects. There's at least one of every archetype, which is really cool. And there's also a brand new archetype that they haven't had previously.
Nice.
Which is really, really cool. And some of the new monsters that they have are like just some of the best designs that they've done. There's a new flying wyvern called Ray Dow, which is like this big electric dragon, and he has like these two horns on his head that come together to make like a rail cannon, and it fires like electricity through it, which is really cool. And then there's like this giant octopus that is like set alight on fire and stuff. So there's some really cool stuff in this game, and there's some really cool returning monsters as well.
Okay, cool. I think you've done well to kind of tease a lot in the game there without spoiling anything as well. You've done that well. I guess considering you gave this game a 10, have you given many other games a 10? Like, where does this kind of rank against some of your other scores?
Yeah, I think I gave Iceborne a 10 actually, which was the world expansion.
Right, okay.
I feel like I must have given something else a 10 as well. I think this is, I said in my review, or like when I posted on socials, that this is the best Monster Hunter since 4 Ultimate, in my opinion. Or at least as like a base release. Like, I enjoy it more than Rise, and I definitely enjoy it more than World as well. So yeah, in the context of Monster Hunter, like I think it's the best of the new ones, at least in a base release. Like, I'm really keen to see where they take the title updates and whatever the expansion is for it as well. And yeah, I definitely think like it'll be a front runner for Game of the Year.
Yeah, I was going to ask you just that. Like, how confident do you think you are that this is going to be up there with kind of other heavy hitters of the year in your kind of Game of the Year contenders? Do you think it's easy top 5 material?
For me, definitely. And I think that like player reception will echo a similar sentiment. Like, even though reviews maybe haven't been, some of them haven't been as good as World, I think it has a lower meta than World's, which is interesting to me. But I think that like the general player reception will be through the roof for this one.
Yeah, well, I've got it installing. I will give it a blast and report back and let you know how I find it.
I'm keen to hear about it.
Winding the clock back now until last week, though, I do have another game to ask you about, seeing as you reviewed it. That is, of course, Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. Conscious we're now a week on from this, but seeing as we've got you on, we'd be amiss not to ask. Do you think the game is as deserving of a playthrough as you would have said Monster Hunter Wilds was?
If you're a fan of the franchise, I would say yes.
Okay.
If you've only...
my follow-up question was going to be, who's it kind of for, do you think?
This game is very much for people who are like longtime fans of the franchise. I think a lot of its narrative payoff comes from being familiar with the characters. It It's definitely not
I
bad.
always got that sense.
Yeah, I think it's the weakest of like RGG spin-off. So like that's including like Judgment, and they did like Ishin, and then also The Man Who Erased His Name. Like I think this is probably the weakest of those. But those are all
Right.
like fantastic games, so I don't think it's bad by any means. But yeah, I think if you got into the franchise with like a Dragon and Infinite Wealth, it's maybe not as worthwhile compared to someone who's been around since or has played the previous entries.
Yeah. What held it back then in your mind, do you think?
I think it feels very tangential for most of the runtime. Like
Right.
the whole like shtick of being like, so it follows one of the like key characters from the series. His name is Goro Majima, and he's been around since like the very first game. And he was actually a protagonist in Yakuza 0, which is like the prequel that released in, I think it was 17 or 18 it came out. So he's like a really big character in the franchise, and he was in 7 and in 8 as well as like a secondary character. So this game is like purely about him, and you play as him. But the gist is that like he wakes up shipwrecked and as an amnesiac, like he has no memory of his prior life, and he just sort of decides, all he remembers is that he was after a treasure, and so he becomes a pirate and assembles a crew to hunt this treasure. And like, if it sounds silly, because it is, like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it definitely knows that it is, and it leans into it. But for most of the runtime, it just kind of feels like, what's the point of this? Like it doesn't really, the other spin-offs tie into the rest of the franchise nicely or stand on their own 2 feet in a way that like justifies their existence. I don't think that really happens for this game until like the post-credit scene, where like it sort of comes full circle and you realize like where it all started, and that made it worthwhile for me, at least. But I definitely think that if you're not like, if you haven't played anything prior to 7, the payoff just won't be there for you.
Right. Okay.
And it is a fun game, but if you've played their other beat 'em ups, if you've played Judgment or like The Man Who Erased His Name, it's really not too different from that. Like you get to play as Goro, who feels a bit different from like Kiryu or, you know, any of the other beat 'em up characters that they've had, like Yagami from Judgment. But I don't think it separates itself like that drastically to make it worthwhile.
Yeah. Okay, maybe I'm not rushing out to play this one, but I was curious about this game because I Like a Dragon is another kind of series that I've not waded into. It's never like quite appealed to me enough, but I kind of liked the sort of irreverent nature of this and just kind of how goofy it looked. And I thought maybe for that sort of reason, it might have been a bit more of like, well, this is like a tangential story that you can kind of just like jump into and sample and give it a go. But yeah, I'm less persuaded to give this a go compared to Monster Hunter Wilds.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend Monster Hunter over the 2. I would only really recommend like Pirate Yakuza if you're a longtime fan and you really like the characters, because that very end payoff made the whole thing worth it for me. But if you had no prior knowledge, you'd just be like, oh, okay.
I think Yakuza fans will be like plenty happy with that though.
Yeah, and they're gonna play it anyway. So
yeah. And you gave it a 7.5 out of 10. So we're not saying it's a bad game. Just,
and there were other parts of it that I enjoyed, like the ship stuff is like surprisingly robust. Like it like feels really good to sail the seas, and the combat is surprisingly good. The progression is cool. And like the world is still big. There's tons of stuff to do. Like they basically just recycled Hawaii from Infinite Wealth and jam-packed with all this new stuff to do. So it's still filled with content. But I think if you're like specifically in it for narrative and like, it's not going to quite pull you in until the very, very end. And the combat it's good, but like I think it's not as engaging as like 7 or 8 is. So it doesn't have that like same hook that the other recent games have had, I think.
Yeah. Interesting. Pivoting now to talk about games that aren't going to see the light of day by the look of things. The Wonder Woman game in the works at Warner Bros. Has been cancelled, and 3 studios shuttered in the process, including the studio behind Multiverses, which was recently wrapped up as well. It's extremely sad news, obviously, and kind of a continued spate of closures and layoffs around the industry, and the writing's probably been on the wall at Warner Brothers an awful lot recently. We've been speaking at length about it on the show, the kind of struggles that Multiverse has experienced, but then also Suicide Squad before it as well. Warner Brothers have declared their intention to focus on key franchises like Harry Potter, Mortal Kombat, DC, and Game of Thrones. What's your reaction to this kind of news all in all, would you say, Harry?
Yeah, it's really shit, to be honest.
Yeah.
It sucks. Like it never seems to end. But this in particular seems like a real bummer, especially Monolith, who worked on
Yeah.
The Middle Earth games, which were like sublime, even despite Shadow of War's like microtransaction controversies. And they did like
Yeah.
Fear and stuff as well, a bunch of really cool old school shooters. And I think a Wonder Woman game had so much promise. It's such a bummer to hear that it's just completely not happening now.
Yeah, I think it's such a shame that we've not seen another game from them materializing. Like, I think we were a little bit skeptical around how the Wonder Woman game was gonna pan out. I think we were kind of nervous as well from like a commercial perspective. Like, and we thought like critically it could do quite well, and I was excited to see the Nemesis system kind of being used
In
again.
some
I
way.
still think it's rather shit that it's like patented,
Yeah.
and that other studios are kind of restricted from using it. I was just pleased to kind of see it incorporated in any game, regardless of kind of who the hero character was. But yeah, I have no doubt they would have done something really interesting with this. I think Wonder Woman is kind of like an underutilized sort of character, and one I'm not all that sort of familiar with outside of like the more recent movies. But yeah, we were concerned that the kind of interest in the character was like going to be falling off in the wake of the most recent movie not reviewing well. I guess just like a broader like anti-DEI sort of sentiment out there as well, kind of
Yeah.
hurting games too, which I'm in no way condoning. That doesn't faze me whatsoever, but it certainly seems to be a trend like across kind of games at the moment as well. So like all that aside, I would have like taken a lot of interest in this game should we have seen more of it. And it's obviously a talented studio, and them not being able to put out kind of anything for all these years of work is obviously just a shitty situation. But yeah, I like as to where I kind of see Warner Bros. Going from here. I think it kind of makes sense, right, for them to kind of narrow in on the franchises that and the properties they know kind of sell and they know there's demand for. I'm curious, like, do you think we've spoken about it on the podcast before, but do you think they're likely to kind of shop around and maybe work through partnerships in the way Marvel does now, more so than developing in-house, or have you got any preferences to what they do?
I don't know. It would be interesting. They have a lot of they have access to so much IP, and they're just not really
Yeah.
do anything with it, which I think is like such a bummer. And like we're seeing it impacting other games as well. Like I know MK1 didn't like even though it reviewed well, like didn't launch particularly well, and hasn't really gone down well with the competitive community, which is sort of what like fighting games live or die by. And like to have access to DC, like you had Rocksteady doing the Arkham trilogy, which are like arguably three of the greatest games ever made. And they're just like not doing anything because they were made to make a live service. Yeah, that was doomed to fail
Yeah.
from the start. So I mean, maybe Wonder Woman was trending in the same direction. I mean, obviously they'll double down on Harry Potter because I'm sure Hogwarts Legacy made them absolute buckets. And Mortal Kombat probably still continues to make them money. But yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if they ever consider going to other studios or publishers to get help. But I mean, I think it's less of a case of that and more that maybe they were too hands-on. And especially with this is probably like fallout from Suicide Squad in a lot of ways and
Yeah.
Multiversus. And they were probably just a little bit too hands-on in the direction they wanted that game to go. And it's come back to bite them.
Yeah, and I hate like seeing studios and creatives kind of bear the brunt of those kind of more senior strategic missteps.
Yeah.
Like I think Jason Schreier and his sort of write up on the decisions being made at Warner Bros. Recently, like summarized it very well. And like it's this kind of trend chasing that's kind of got us here. And obviously they went after the kind of live service kind of format quite aggressively, and that's not panned out. So I can really hope they find studios to work with that can use these properties and kind of hear them out on their pitches and let them sort of envisage the direction of the game rather than kind of being that studio kind of force, that publisher sort of force coming in and kind of setting particular expectations. Yeah, I just sort of feel like it doesn't sort of play to the strengths of these kind of properties. Like, for what it's worth, like I thought Hogwarts Legacy kind of as a format, as a design of that game made so much sense for that IP. And it was weird that they were kind of doing that on one hand whilst they had
Yeah.
gone a very different route with their kind
something
of
else.
Batman Arkham universe. Yeah, and totally botched that. Yeah, if something was going to go more of a live service route, I reckon like a pitch for Game of Thrones could work in that sort of way, like
Some sort
making
of
a Game of
MMO
Thrones like
type
MMO,
thing.
yeah, style of thing. I think that would be really cool. Like Dune Awakening is a game coming out this year that I've got a lot of interest in. I think that's like a cool use of the IP.
Yeah.
That I can see kind of like adapting to Game of Thrones in a sort of cool way. Like pick an era outside of the realm of like the TV shows and the books, and just kind of like let us explore Westeros in a period of history with those
Sure.
kind of similar sort of themes at play. Yeah, I hope they can kind of turn it around and just like put some trust back in the studios to pitch some
Yeah,
cool games.
it does seem like a bit of a downward trend in general for other, like it's happening at other publishers as well. We're seeing it with Ubisoft, and they're apparently on the market for buyout. Like,
Yeah.
so like who knows? I mean, and like it seemed like Hogwarts did so well for them, but clearly it didn't offset whatever they lost from Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
And
I think it's
now,
a pity they couldn't have found a buyer because that might have saved these studios to an extent.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's too hard to say. But yeah, I think there's a lot of this happening within that kind of AAA publisher space, right? Where they're just like trimming down their operations after a few kind of missteps. And yeah, I mean, it's affecting PlayStation as well.
Yeah.
And obviously has Xbox. So it's just endemic of a broader issue, I think. But yeah, the trend chasing kind of has to stop for sure.
Absolutely.
Because by the time they turn these games around, people are like onto a different trend anyhow.
They're
like
not
they kind of
interested,
need to
like,
no, yeah.
And even games that
and the
have
space is too
succeeded.
competitive.
Yeah, like even games that have succeeded, like Destiny has done relatively well, but is probably in the worst position I've ever seen it, and has been for a good like 3 or 4 months. And Bungie have been kicking on with this game for 10 years, and it's
Yeah, what's your changing topics a little bit here? What's your sort of feeling about Marathon? Like, as a big sort of Destiny fan, are you optimistic that Bungie can kind of turn the ship around with Marathon, or is it going to be another misstep in PlayStation's live service strategy?
Yeah, I really don't know about the game itself. I'll be interested to see where they go with it. I think to be honest, I think if it's got a price tag on launch, that's going to be a real shot in the foot. I think it sort of needs to be free to play. Or like
They got away with it with Destiny, though, right? Like that had a
Yeah.
price tag at launch.
I would say Destiny is free to try and not so much free to play. But I mean, as an extraction shooter, which it so apparently is, like you're competing with games like Escape from Tarkov and like these games that are already really deep rooted in the genre and have players really hooked. And to be able to pull those people away, you need to make the experience really compelling. And people are not going to give it a try if there's a paywall. And I think the thing that I'm most scared about with Marathon is that like Bungie and maybe PlayStation by extension as well are putting all their eggs in that basket. And if it doesn't do well, like Destiny's going to cop like a good chunk of the fallout from that, which I feel like we're sort of already seeing in Destiny, especially recently. So yeah, I'm not feeling too hot about Marathon, but like I hope it works out. I really do.
Yeah. I think it's got a better chance than Fair Games. So dread to think what happens to that.
Yeah.
Got one more topic I'm eager to cover today. The much anticipated Fable from Playground Games has been delayed until 2026. I know a fair few people that were excited for this one. They're going to have to wait a little bit longer. The announcement came via Xbox Game Studio head Craig Duncan, who stressed it's definitely worth the wait, whilst releasing some pre-alpha gameplay footage showing off Playground's incredibly detailed take on Albion. I thought what was included in this footage looked quite impressive. Are you in kind of any way disappointed by this announcement, or I guess relatively pleased that it's been given to more time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really I've never actually played Fable, so it doesn't really bother me either way. I'll probably check it out when it comes out regardless, but I always think if the game needs more time in the oven, then it needs more time in the oven. I do wonder, like the timing seems a bit weird given Avowed just released, and I wonder if sort of the lukewarm reception to that has had some sort of hand in the delay, and how much of it is like related to that. But yeah, like if the game needs more time, it needs more time. Playground have proved themselves very frequently with the Forza games, especially the Horizon ones. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Like it, yeah, it blows my mind that it's the same studio
I know it's so weird.
sometimes.
And the footage that they showed looked good. Like it look. I mean, for alpha, like it looks fairly fleshed out and it looks great, and the
Yeah.
combat looks pretty good. So I'd be keen to see where they take it.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that this is labeled as pre-alpha did concern me slightly. Like, I kind of felt like they would be pretty far along with like an alpha or like even a beta version of the game. But yeah, it depends, I guess, what the timelines were exactly. Yeah, personally, I'm not at all phased by this. Like, I think everyone, like at press start's kind of like in agreement that more time and delays is not a bad thing if it produces a better game at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, like I know you said people are lukewarm on Avowed. I'm having an absolute blast with Avowed.
Yeah, that's
Like
cool.
I am really loving it. It's the kind of itch I had, like it's scratching the itch I had that like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 came out. I was really enjoying that, but it's quite like it's
Systems
quite
heavy.
dense and
Yeah.
it's quite dense and systems heavy and requires like a little bit more kind of attention, I think, like as you're sort of playing. There's kind of a more just chill, kind of go with the flow sort of a fantasy RPG in Avowed. That like is definitely a throwback, unsurprisingly, to your kind of Elder Scrolls games, your Skyrim. It's just a bit more accessible and digestible, and I can kind of jump in and do a quick quest and jump out without too much stress.
Yeah.
And that's kind of allowing me to kind of like dig into the story a little bit more. And, you know, I've got a friend in the Discord playing it at the same time. Shout out to Daniel. It's only fair I shout out Daniel because I shouted out DP last week. And, you know, he's given me like, oh, have you found this weapon? Have you done this bounty yet? Da, 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 da. And which is just the same sort of experience I had playing Skyrim, like back when that first came out. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And it's kind of like having installed Monster Hunter Wilds today. Like I'm like as excited as I am to give that game a go. I'm like I kind of don't want to put Avowed down just yet. Like I'm really enjoying that game. So yeah, for that reason, I'm like I don't know if it makes a huge amount of sense to put out Fable this year, particularly if it's not like quite ready. Like give Avowed plenty of space. Maybe that kind of finds an audience later in the year. I guess that's the kind of beauty of Game Pass, right? Like if you're a subscriber, like as the year starts to quiet down or whatever, the games aren't really coming out that much that speaks to you. You got to dig into that back catalog. It's there at your disposal, and maybe kind of Avowed sees some success later on as well. I'm curious for your perspective though, Harry. How do you think this impacts Xbox's 2025? Like, does it still hold up in your mind without Fable in it?
I think like critically, yeah. Like I'm excited for I'm really excited for Doom: The Dark Ages. I think that looks phenomenal.
Hell yeah.
And I think that'll sell well. It'll probably review well. Like it is incredible at making
You would
shooters.
assume so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think South of Midnight looks cool. Expedition 33 looks cool. Like there's some really interesting games coming out from Xbox. I think they'll like most of them should be pretty critically well received. Like I know South of Midnight previewed really well. How well they sell though, yeah, I'm not sure. I think Doom will sell well. And I think what Xbox needs right now is money after that Activision acquisition, and that's why they've been having all these layoffs. So like I think from the perspective of like, yeah, they'll probably be putting out some cool games. Will it result in more layoffs? Maybe.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that it becomes pretty front heavy for the year, which is fine. Like that's not to say that's kind of when all the kind of sales sort of land, I guess. Like, you know, so much of their thing now is just kind of building this catalog of games and keeping people subscribed, right? And the end of the year is kind of helped by the fact that they're going to have kind of third-party releases kind of come in. A Call of Duty, obviously, as well, presumably landing like October, November, and its typical sort of slot. So, I don't think it impacts things all that much. Like I think just the front half for this year alone, having Avowed in there, having South of Midnight, you said it, having Doom
May as well.
like that's huge. like I think Xbox fans would be stoked to kind of be having the first half of the year that they're set to have. And I'm gonna lump Indiana Jones in there too, because I feel like that came out late
Yeah,
in
tail
the
end of
year last
December,
year.
yeah.
It's kind of, I think a lot of people kind of picked that up in January. I mean, like PC Game Pass for me is like having an absolute workout in a way that it's never had
Is
before.
Blade
I've
coming out this
pre-installed
year,
so
or is
much.
that next year?
Uh,
Arcane's.
I don't think that's this
Yeah, okay.
year.
Yeah.
I mean, if it is, like, even more so reason, I guess, that Fable missing it isn't a big isn't a big deal. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, but-
and like even like Ninja Gaiden,
Yeah.
being kind of shadow dropped
Yeah.
earlier this year as well. Like
Yeah.
it's Game Pass is just, we've said it a million times before. It's like great
Yeah,
value,
still is a really good
whether or
deal.
not it translates into the sort of margins that sustain Xbox as a publisher long term. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, for gamers, it's pretty unreal, and it's particularly in the first half of this year. I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Fable, I'm sure it'll be great when it comes out. We can wait.
Yeah.
I have a rapid fire question though for you, Harry. We're really rattling through everything today, and obviously this sort of one-on-one situation doesn't help us what the wiki. I could just give you like a token point if you want, but it'd be good to have you back on.
We might as
like,
well play, you know, it's
yeah. A rapid fire question that I have for you today though is EB Games is now selling single Pokemon and Magic cards. We don't have to take this as a rapid fire question. Maybe we dig into it a little bit. But are you like in on the craze of trading cards? Can you see yourself going back? What's your story?
I was into Pokemon for a bit there when like everyone was during the Sword and Shield era when they did like Darkness Ablaze and Vivid Voltage and stuff like that. And then I fell off of it and I don't really have any interest in getting back into it. I think it's cool that they sell singles now. And like, I know that there's that Magic Final Fantasy expansion coming out soon, which I think looks really, really cool. But like every bone in my body knows that if I start investing money into that, it's a slippery slope. So I think I'll just
I know.
Look at the artwork.
I was in the
from
same
afar,
headspace when the Lord of the Rings
longingly.
Magic cards were coming out. I was like, if I start doing this, it's going to be a bad time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I played a lot of Magic back in high school, and that maybe kind of lasted for a sort of few years. And I even like went to some Magic events, like collected a fair few cards.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it just became prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I can't justify sort of doing
Especially when
this.
games are already expensive.
Yeah, exactly. My financial priorities moved elsewhere. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I understand the appeal for sure, and I think it makes a lot of sense for EB to start doing this. I'm curious to see what the sort of take up of it is. I can't imagine your like local trading card game store is like all that thrilled that they're doing this.
No,
But I
that's sort of
guess,
something that
they've
they
got the
had
head start
over
already,
like the big retailers is that like big retailers never really did that, but now, well, obviously. But I imagine EB being EB, they'll probably charge, you know, retail price for these cards and then some. So I think it probably will see like the most hardcore loyal EB customers engage with it, and you know it'll be interesting to see if it takes off or not for them.
Yeah. They're kind of doing all that they can.
Everything.
I admire them a lot for it.
They're throwing the kitchen sink at everything.
Nice. What game, just to close out as well, like what other games are you kind of most looking forward to this year? You got some? I'm just enjoying catching up with you, Harry. I don't want our Zoomer takeover to end.
No, this has been good. We have free reign of the podcast. We've got to make the most of it.
It's never stopping.
I'm really excited for Doom. Really, really excited. Doom Eternal is like probably a top 10 all time for me. I just think that game is like so exquisitely designed. It makes my brain very happy. So I'm really, really excited to see what they do with that. Like after the preview round that they did for it last month, like I'm really keen the direction that they're taking it in. Like it feels different. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. Ninja Gaiden 4 is a big one as well. I love Platinum. I played Ninja Gaiden Black for the first time when it released as part of the trilogy, I think 2 years ago now. And played Ninja Gaiden 2 at the tail end of last year on my Steam Deck, and that was so good. Like that game is absolutely nuts. And I'm keen to get into 3, even though it's not had the best reception. But 4 being like co-developed by Platinum is so exciting to me. I think it looks really cool. So I'm excited for that. Yeah, and I think 2XKO, which is Riot's League fighting game, is meant to be coming out this year. I think that looks really cool. And that's going to be like free to play. That's doing a lot of really interesting things. Like it's got 2v2, like it's a tag fighter, but it has a mode where you can do 2 players versus 2 players and control 1 character each. And it's going to be free to play like League is. And I think that game is going to take a lot of people by surprise when it launches. I'm really keen.
This is the useful sort of intel I need for our fantasy critic. This is very useful.
Yeah.
Just feed me the games that maybe those sleeper hits that everyone else is overlooking.
Yeah,
this is what I need.
2XKO is going to go off when it comes out for sure. Just because it's free to play, so many people will check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm right with you on Doom. I cannot wait for that game to come out. Like I'm just such a fan of the recent iterations, and this, like I've said it a million times before, but like the medieval sort of slant to this one too, just like so great. I'm a little bit worried about what it's going to do to my PC. Like I'm just looking at these like minimum specs nowadays, and it frightens me an awful lot.
Yeah, I'm getting there as well.
But I mean, they're typically like well optimized games.
Eternal
I'm just worried
was really
about
well
what that.
optimized, yeah.
I'm just worried about what that kind of bottoming out of it is. But hopefully that's fine. Are you curious about Metal Eden as well? Like that one kind of caught my eye, given it seems to be such like kind of a Doom style of game, albeit with like a cyberpunk Ghost Runner sort of influence.
I'm interested. I'm always down for like I guess what you would more consider like a boomer shooter, because I feel like there's just not enough of them, and they're always such a good time. I'm also really keen for Split Fiction next month, because It Takes Two was such a blast, and Elden Ring Nightreign, I'm also very excited for.
Yeah, did you get in on the network test of that at all?
I did, yeah. We got some codes, and Shan sent me one for that, and I like planned to only sort of check it out for one test, but ended up enjoying it so much that like I came back to it. It's such a weird idea, but it's so well executed.
Yeah.
And I'm really keen to play more of that, because it just like really took me by surprise how much I liked it. Yeah, so I'm really, really keen to.
Okay, we got to dig into this more. You don't have anywhere to be, do you? Like, I know we're running beyond the show notes here.
No.
Yeah, like what do you think worked about it? Because it is like such a different sort of style of thing. I feel like everyone's been caught by surprise by it too, right? Like I know so many people that are fans of it. Because
you describe it to someone and it sounds like it shouldn't be good. So like. I think I really like the sort of roguelike elements. And also like it helped. I think it definitely helped that I played with some other games media, and like we had like a party chat going, so we were actively communicating. So we actually won more times than we lost, I think. But I think like having I think there's 3 characters in the beta at least. And they're all different. They all have different weapons, and there's like skills that they have that are different. So the way that you like look for upgrades and build the characters is different. So each run feels different in like the way that most roguelites do. But it also like sort of pays off to like Souls is obviously very entrenched in understanding like enemy patterns and tells and like map design and things like that to make the most of it. And that goes hand in hand with roguelite experience. And I think that eventuates really well in Nightreign, where like if you're familiar with the map and like the dungeons and areas that they have on it, you can make the most of it to become as powerful as you possibly can to hopefully, win the run. And I guess
that'll get harder when the procedural elements come into it, though, right? Like, I think for the purpose of the network test, it was all just pre-laid out, wasn't it?
Pretty well, and like they had the same boss at the end of each run. So once you did, the final boss once, you kind of knew what to expect. But I think the like even though we beat it once, like the joy in replaying came from like trying out the different classes. Like there's a sorcerer type class, and then there's a sort of a tank character. That has like a shield and can like go in the air and like dive bomb down and stuff, which is really cool. And then there's like a guy with a grappling hook. So there's like some movement stuff in there. It's just really cool. And they just like randomly throw stuff at you where they'll just like take a boss from base Elden Ring and it starts chasing you in the overworld and you like have to kill it. And if you manage to
there's like the invasions, right?
That's what those are. Yeah, imagine getting invaded by a boss. and you can't opt out of it. That's what that was like. But in the moment, like, it was so cool.
Yeah.
And I think like the pace of it is really good. Like the movement is great. Like being able to scale up and just like have complete freedom over how you explore the world and like chase down. It was just a really cool melding of ideas that I think like is just so unique. And I'm really keen for more content just to mess around with it.
I'm really keen to get stuck into it and give it a blast myself. I didn't get to participate in the network test, but I'm like I said kind of before we were chatting before we started recording. Like I've never really quite like hit into full gear with a Souls game.
Yeah.
And I really tried with like Elden Ring, and it was just like the time that it is taking me to progress this game in like any meaningful way is just such a slog.
Yeah.
It kind of was impacting my kind of overall enjoyment of it. But
Yeah,
I really wanted to see like everything else in that game and get a feel for it. And maybe I'm starting to turn that corner. I don't know. But I always thought the seamless multiplayer mod was like really gonna like unlock it for me. Not that I ever gave that a go, but I reckon if I could like get some mates in, play this, it might just like kind of unlock it for me to like make the rest of it sort of click into gear.
And a run is like just under an hour as well, so it's like really digestible. Because I think it's 3 days and they're 15 minutes per day, so yeah, it's about 45 minutes and you've got the final boss. So like, yeah, I think it's just a wacky idea, but like it just really lands.
I had a lot of faith that this was going to be good. Like it's hard to kind of bet against FromSoft. And so for that reason, like I drafted it, and when we did our fancy critic draft, and everyone was a bit skeptical of me for doing that. I was like, surely this reviews well. So I'm really pleased to hear that everyone has come away from the network test with a positive outlook on it. That's very reassuring.
I definitely enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. Like, just because I'm not typically as much into multiplayer and that sort of thing anymore. Definitely enjoy a good roguelite, but this just like, I don't know, it's good in a way that like other FromSoft games aren't, but like still good. Like, it's weird to describe.
Hopefully the kind of like networking side of it holds up okay. I feel like that could be a bit of a deal breaker.
Yeah, the network test did seem pretty stable. I know they had...
And the matchmaking and stuff, that all worked okay?
Yeah, we were able to find each other and party up just fine. And I believe for the first day, they had issues where too many people were trying to play. And there was no like party matchmaking. But every time I played it, I had no issues. One of the guys I was playing with dropped out once, but I presume that was an internet issue on his end and not the game itself, because me and the other guy we were playing with were just fine. So yeah, I presume it should be all right.
Nice. Another one to look forward to. We love it. With that though, let's bring an end to what was this week's episode of the Press Start podcast, the Zoomer takeover. It indeed was. Subscribe to us on Listen or the podcast service of your choice. Follow us at press.au and visit the site at press.com.au. We've been joined today by Harry.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at X at Harry_Callow, and I believe it's the same on Instagram as well. Go read my Monster Hunter Wilds review, and there'll also probably be some launch day coverage, especially for people who are looking to get into the franchise for the first time. And, more reviews coming next month as well for other things.
We're well and truly into review season. I think there's going to be a fair few exciting ones to look forward to as well. I've been your host, Ewan. You can follow me on socials at Ewan_Roxburgh. We'll be back again next week. Harry, I'm looking forward to having you back on the show again in no time. But until then, happy gaming.
Bye.